Hello and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here and I'm in my studio and I've just painted this warm-up exercise using one colour. I use Cotman Payne'sgrey for these kinds of monochrome warm-ups because I like the way it splits out into lots of shades of grey but into some beautiful blues as well. The aim of these warm-ups is exactly that, to sort of warm up my painting skills, to sort of loosen up, to let go, to take the pressure off myself and just have a little bit of fun and seeing if I can sort of create something out of nothing, just from very loose brushwork on the page, one colour, a little bit of salt, playing around with brushes, gravity as it helps the paint to sort of flow on the page, and a palette knife just to scrape through the paint to give me the suggestion of some tree trunks and branches. Then just a little bit of finessing at the end. So let's get started, and I hope you'll enjoy watching this and maybe have a go at something similar yourself. I'm using Saunders Waterford cold press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board and my board's at an angle of about sort of 20 to 30 degrees. I'm going to paint wet in wet, so I'm splashing some paint fairly randomly across the page, leaving some dry areas as well, which is important because as my random brush strokes of paint land on the page, you can see I'm sort of putting in rough tree canopy shapes, but just allowing the brush to dance over the page. Where it hits wet paper, it will flow and run. Where it hits dry paper, it will stay where it is and give me a really nice range of soft and hard edges straight away. And as the paint runs out on the brush, I get slightly paler paint, which you can see here, which is giving me just some sort of trees that are slightly further back into the distance. Just sweeping across the foreground with nice rich paint and picking up some dry brush texture here and there and leaving some unpainted paper gives me a very loose, rough foreground. The brush I'm using here for this is my 1.5 inch Princeton Aqua Elite Mottler. You can use any large brush that you're comfortable with for this sort of work. You could use a Harky brush, a flat brush, a large wash brush, and now I'm just using my 3/4 inch flat just to run through and soften a few brush strokes here and there. I've dipped into some very pale Payne'sgrey now. I'm going to work around my trees with this very pale grey, carefully just putting in a little bit of sky. I'm not too worried here about things running. This is a warm-up exercise and it's a practice, and I'm trying to keep things really, really loose, working quickly, freely, and with as fewer brush strokes as possible. This sort of thing is a great exercise for beginners. It takes the pressure off you and teaches you how to sort of play with watercolour without trying to make a finished painting, and just really get into seeing exactly what watercolour, gravity and water can do for you on the page. I'm scraping through the rich paint with my palette knife to reveal the paper underneath in the shapes of tree trunks and branches, just linking together some of these fairly random brush strokes, hopefully pulling the scene together so that it becomes a little bit more obvious that I'm painting a landscape with trees. Don't worry if you find this doesn't work out the first time, second time, maybe even third or fourth time. It's something that takes a little bit of practice, and it takes sort of letting go and just letting yourself use really rich paint and really beginning to learn to understand the difference in the way the paint behaves on the wet paper as opposed to how it behaves on the dry paper. And it's that understanding that will really help you to make some progress. So I've laid my board flat now that everything is looking how I want it to, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of ordinary fine table salt into the damp paint in the foreground. It's important when you use salt not to sprinkle it into really wet paint, because otherwise it will just dissolve the salt without making any effects apart from a bit of a mess. And if you try sprinkling it onto dry paint, it'll have no effect. So you want that sort of just damp paint just before it dries. Then you'll get some really pretty effects as the salt crystals push away the paint and create sort of little frost flower and fern patterns. So I'm going to let this dry completely, go and have a cup of coffee, and then come back once the salt has worked its magic. So here's this dry first stage, and the salt has created some beautiful suggestions of flowers and weeds in the foreground. I'm really happy with those. And you can also see how the Cotman Payne'sgrey has split out into blacks, greys and blues. Because of the water, it split those colours out of the paint. I'm really pleased with the way it looks. I just think it needs a few little touches of dark paint to bring this exercise together. So using a size 1 rigger brush, I'm going to use nice rich dark Payne'sgrey to paint in a few tree trunks and branches just to pull the scene together. I'm being careful not to cover all the marks that I scraped in with a palette knife earlier, but to use brush strokes that will complement the marks that are already there. And I think I'm quite happy with that for my warm-up. I'm going to remove the tape, and that removes all the messy brush strokes that have gone off the side of the board onto the tape, and gives you a nice clean white border, and it helps us to sort of see it with fresh eyes. It's always a lovely surprise when the tape comes off, because suddenly the painting looks more finished. And seeing it with fresh eyes, we can see whether this little exercise needs anything else adding to it. And now that I'm looking at it, I think I just need a few more branches. So I'm going to use my rigger brush and add a few more very fine branches just across some of these gaps here. I think I'm quite happy with the painting otherwise. And I feel nicely warmed up. I feel more relaxed now, and I'm ready for hopefully a productive session in the studio. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this little exercise come together, and that hopefully it'll inspire you to practice your loose brush stroke in this sort of way. These kinds of exercises, although they don't always work, can be a great way to loosen up and to really get the most out of your big brushes, to suggest detail rather than overtly paint it. So many thanks for watching. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It's free to do, and it really does help with our reach. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us on Patreon. If you'd like to support us, then please follow any of the links below. So many thanks again. Take care. I'll see you again soon. And happy painting. Bye.